Serious. What was your first traumatic experience?
Story 1. When I was a kid, I was walking with my dog through this big field with very tall grass. As we're walking, all her hair stands up on end, and she jumped in front of me right as a big coyote came charging out of the grass at us. It was bigger than her, but she put up a heck of a fight. The sound of animals fighting is horrible. I was just frozen with fear. After a few seconds that felt like minutes, she got the upper hand and turned the coyote on its heels and chased it off before doubling back to me. I had never seen a wild animal aggressive like that, and it scared the hell out of me. The next day, we found the coyote dead. Up close, I could see that it was missing hair and seemed to have a very bad case of mange. I felt kind of bad for it, actually. I had seen coyotes before, and they always sprinted in the opposite direction. This one must have been really sick and desperate to go after my dog. As I type this out 14 years later, I'm happy to report that my dog is currently happily sleeping on my bed. She's a great dog, and even though she's slowed down with age, she still stands up tall and raises her hackles whenever she hears the coyotes yelping in the woods behind my house. I think she's still ready for round 2. Story 2. My sister tried to commit suicide when I was 7 by cutting her arms, legs, and neck with a razor blade. My older cousins found her and hauled her into the driveway. Me and my sister grabbed towels for my parents. We waited 20 minutes for an ambulance. She survived and was sent to a group home. Story 3. When I was 11 years old, my best friend passed out a swim meet. Me and my friends at first thought she was fine, but 2 days later, we were brought to the hospital to visit her. She was in a coma and completely unrecognizable. Her parents told us to try to talk to her because she might be able to hear us, but all we could do was cry. She died later that day. I don't think anyone knew how to properly help a bunch of 11-year-olds grieve. Edit. We later found out she had died due to a heart defect. Story 4. I saw a family of 6 get into a bad car wreck on the interstate Easter Sunday of 2nd grade. Got a good 5 seconds view of a contorted body of a woman who got thrown out a windshield. Shot burned into my brain and desensitized the fuck out of 7 years old me. Fast forward 10 years, and I watched a classmate of mine get smacked by a pickup truck in front of my house while he was on a bike. Ran to him, and he was obviously already dead, and his abdomen was basically jello. I stayed with him until the ambulance took him. Somehow out of the whole experience, the worst thing about it was me trying to explain to my mom why I had blood up to my elbows. Story 5. Losing my mom at 9. She was raising me mostly by herself, and my birth father was not part of my life ever. She was in hospital for something that should have been simple, but she had to stay overnight. The next morning, my mom's partner and my uncle, mom's brother, turned up at the partner's parents' place where I was. I was all excited because I only got to see my uncle for birthdays and Christmas. Then they sat me down and told me what happened. First time I know, I just burst into tears. No build-up or anything, just heard the words from my uncle and I started crying. Been over 25 years now, and I still get choked up, and I struggle watching any show about foster kids or losing mums to this day. Also, I visit her grave every year on her birthday. Story 6. I was 4. My family went to visit my grandparents. They had an in-ground pool. Everyone was outside having a barbecue. I was walking around the edge of the pool and looked down and saw my little brother had fallen in the pool right behind the ladder. He was only 1, so he obviously couldn't swim. I laid down on my stomach and looped my arms under his armpits, pulling his head above the water. But just barely. He was heavy. He was fully dressed, and I was only 4. I screamed and screamed for our mother. It felt like forever, but someone finally noticed me, and all the adults came rushing over. No one ever talked to me about it afterwards. I was terrified of water for a long time, and am still very overprotective of my little brother. Story 7. When I was 4, my mother and I lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in downtown Vancouver. In the summer, there was suddenly a smell. Then it became a bad smell, and soon after that it was unbearable. My mother called the landlord about the smell, and they didn't do anything. The smell got even worse until one day my mom had enough and went to examine the cause. She sniffed and smelled around on each floor of the building until she got to the apartment directly above ours. She knocked, then banged. No answer. She came back for 2 days every few hours and banged on the door. Still no answer. She wrote a letter and tried to stuff it under his door, but it would not squeeze through as the space in between the floor and the door was so narrow and the hallway carpet was also blocking the way. So she went to put it in the unit's mailbox in the front area of the building. When she got there, the mailbox was stuffed full and there was a sticker on it from the post office, probably saying they could not deliver mail to the box from it being so full. When she discovered the mailbox full, it dawned on her something might be wrong. Her and I went back to the apartment and she called the police. Within the hour, 2 police officers showed up and started banging on the upstairs apartment's door. The building was so old and run down that we could hear every bang, the dispatcher on their radios, every step, and then eventually them coming downstairs to our unit. They asked my mom where the landlord was, and she explained how he lived elsewhere and how she had called to complain repeatedly only to be ignored. The officer then asked my mom to call the landlord and give him the phone. The landlord answered, and the officer identified himself to him and asked for access to the unit/landlord to do an emergency inspection. The guy was there in 10 minutes. As soon as he got to the building, my mom picked me up in her arms and we followed the landlord and the officers upstairs. The landlord banged on the door, announced he was doing an emergency inspection, then unlocked the door. I really wish that my mother would have left me in our apartment watching TV or something, because when the door was opened, directly across from the entrance to the apartment was the guy who lived there, dead. He had slashed his own wrists and taken a bunch of pills while sitting at his kitchen table. He was dead for weeks and bloated so bad his skin was splitting, and he had maggots coming out of his mouth and out his nose. I saw it all as everyone in the hallway was completely stunned, and my mother could not even process what she was seeing, never mind what I was seeing. And if we thought the smell was bad before, we were immediately proven wrong the second that door was opened. It was such a horrific smell/sight that the landlord ran outside to throw up multiple times. The police called the coroner, and they took the body out of the building. After he was out, they were gone and never came back, as it was very clear what had happened. The landlord came to our apartment a couple hours later, as my mother was looking in the newspaper for a new place, and offered her a deal. She could have the next 3 months rent-free if she cleaned the apartment upstairs out and got it ready to be repainted. She reluctantly agreed, but got to it that day. She took me upstairs and instructed me to sit in this person's living room and wait while she started cleaning up the blood and other miscellaneous dried bodily fluids off the kitchen floor. After she did that, she started going through his possessions, looking to see if there was a family member she could call to collect the deceased's belongings, yet sadly found no such information. She contacted one of the officers that came to our apartment to see if they knew of anyone, but unfortunately he had no known living family they could find. She waited a week, just in case someone showed up, before she had to clear the belongings/furniture out of the unit. She eventually got everything out and scrubbed that place as best as she could, but the smell would not go away. We went to a store and bought this stuff called Nil Odor. It was a spray can that was supposed to remove any odor from places it was used. My mother used 6 full cans over 4 days. Not only did it not remove the smell, but it mixed it with its own smell and created a whole new level of awful. We went back to the store and explained how it didn't work at removing the smell. They said it was not the right kind and she should have used the Nil Odor drops, which she promptly bought. She used the entire bottle of that over a few days and still could not get rid of the smell of the rotting corpse out of the apartment. It now just smelled like chemicals and death. The smell was still so awful and she could not take it anymore. We moved about a week later as it was just too much. She stayed in contact with another person who lived in the apartment and found out that the building still smelled of the noxious awfulness 6 months later. To this day, if I smell Nil Odor, I have vivid flashbacks to that door being opened with me in my mother's arms, staring directly at this festering mass of rotting death, and the terrible realization that his whole life was shoved into bags and thrown into a dumpster, and there were no loved ones to remember or mourn him. This was my first experience with trauma that even 35 years later still haunts me to this day. Story 8. First one that I remember. I was about 5, and my brother was about 3. My dad went to the store to pick something up real quick. I think it was seeds for the garden he and I had started that weekend. While he was gone, my mother told my brother and I to get ready for bed. It was really early for that, maybe 6:30. Anyway, my dad gets back, can't find my brother or I, and apparently finds my mother in their bedroom, in their bed, with another man. A fight breaks out between the three of them, yelling, screaming, pushing, shoving. They end up downstairs in the living room, pushing each other, and that's when I finally decided to leave my room to see what's happening. So I'm standing quietly in the hallway at the top of the stairs, which looks down over the living room, and I just see my parents and a strange man fighting. At this point, it has escalated to hitting and punching, along with tons of screaming on my mom's part. The couches are getting pushed around, and I stood there, watching it. I don't remember at what point I really got noticed or how the fight stopped. I do remember seeing the flashing red and blue lights of the cop cars in our driveway through the windows. I remember each of the adults being taken outside and interviewed by the cops. While my mother and her boyfriend were outside being interviewed, my dad sat on the stairs with me and read me a story. I still have the book, and I remember exactly what page he was on when he had to stop reading and go get interviewed by the cops. He left in handcuffs because my mother made it into a sob story of being abused and her boyfriend backed her up. My mother came back inside and told me to just go to bed. And that was the first time I learned what a terrible human my mother was. Her boyfriend lived there with us from that day forward, until she did the exact same thing to him a few years later. Invited new boy toy for fun times, started a fight, got old boyfriend kicked out, and new boy toy moved in by the next day. Not the worst trauma I suffered, but it really fucked up 5-year-old me. And that's it for today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment with an anecdote or experience similar to the video's topic. Leave a like, share if you enjoyed the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye.